Okay, welcome back to the Book of Days project. We will attempt to read selections from Chambers' Book of Days throughout the calendar year of 2009. January 2nd is quite an eventful day, so let's move along. We have been having some technological difficulties, but I think we may have worked them out. Bear with us. January 2nd, born John, Marquis of Granby, 1721, General Wolfe, Westerham, Kent, 1727, died Publius Ovidius Naso, the Roman poet, year 18. Titus Livius, the Roman historian, also died in the year 18 in Padua. It is the feast day of Saint Macarius of Alexandria. Saint Macarius was a notable example of those early Christians who, for the sake of heavenly meditation, forsook the world and retired to live in savage wildernesses. Originally a confectioner in Alexandria, he withdrew about the year 325 into the Bays in Upper Egypt and devoted himself wholly to religious thoughts. Afterwards, he took up his abode in still remoter deserts, bordering on Libya, where there were indeed other hermits, but all out of sight of each other. He exceeded his neighbors in the practice of those austerities which were then thought the highest qualification for the blessed abodes of the future. For 7 years together, says Alban Butler, he lived only on raw herbs and pulse, and for the 3 following years contented himself with 4 or 5 ounces of bread a day, end quote. Not a fifth part of the diet required to keep the inmates of modern jails in good health. Hearing great things of the self-denial of the monks of Tabena, he went there in disguise, and astonished them all by passing through Lent on the aliment furnished by a few green cabbage leaves eaten on Sundays. He it was of whom the striking story is told, that having once killed a gnat which bit him, he immediately hastened in a penitent and self-mortifying humor to the marshes of Scete, which abound with great flies, and torment even to the wild boar, and exposed himself to these ravaging insects for 6 months, at the end of which time his body was a mass of putrid sores, and he could only be recognized by his voice. Also January 2nd, born General Wolfe. When in 1759 Pitt entrusted General Wolfe the expedition against Quebec, on the day preceding his embarkation, Pitt, desirous of giving his last verbal instructions, invited him to dinner at Hayes, Lord Temple being the only other guest. As evening advanced, Wolfe, healed, perhaps by his own aspiring thoughts and the unwanted society of statesmen, broke forth in a strain of gasconade and bravado. He drew his sword and rapped the table with it. He flourished it round the room, and he talked of the mighty things which the sword was to achieve. The 2 ministers sat aghast at an exposition so unusual from any man of real sense and spirit, and when at last Wolfe had taken his leave, and his carriage was heard to roll from the door, Pitt seemed for the moment shaken in the right opinion which his deliberate judgment had formed of Wolfe. He lifted up his eyes and arms, and exclaimed to Lord Temple, "Good God, that I should have entrusted the fate of the country and of the administration to such hands." This story is told by Lord Temple himself to the Right Honourable Thomas Grenville, the friend of Lord Mahone, who has inserted the anecdote in the history of Raglan. Lord Temple also told Grenville that on the evening in question Wolfe had partaken most sparingly of wine, so that this ebullition could not have been the effect of any excess. The incident affords a striking proof how much a fault of manner may obscure and disparage high excellence of mind. Also on January 2nd, Ovid. Ovid died at about the age of 61. We have only imperfect accounts of the Roman bards, but we know pretty clearly that Ovid lived as a gay and luxurious gentleman in Rome through the greater part of the reign of Augustus, and when past 50 was banished by that emperor, probably in consequence of his concern in some scandalous amour of a female member of the imperial family. Let us think of what it would be for a darling of London society like the late Thomas More to have been condemned to spend his days at a fishing village in Friesland or Lapland, and we shall have some idea of the pangs of the unfortunate Naso on taking up his forced abode at Tomi on the Black Sea. Death brought the only true relief which he could experience after he had endured this exile at least 8 years. It is an interesting instance of the respect which brilliant talents extort even from the rudest, that a local monument was reared to Ovid, and that Tomi is now called Ovidiopol, or Ovid's city. The capture of Granada of 1492. The long resistance of the Moors to the Spanish troops of King Ferdinand and Isabella being at length overcome, arrangements were made for the surrender of their capital to the Spaniards. As the Bishop of Avila passed in to take possession of the Alhambra, the magnificent palace of the Moorish king, its former master mournfully passed out, saying only, "Go in and occupy the fortress which Allah has bestowed upon your powerful land in punishment of the sins of the Moors." The Catholic sovereigns meanwhile waited in the Vega below to see the silver cross mounted on the tower of the Alhambra, the appointed symbol of possession. As it appeared, a shout of joy rose from the assembled troops, and the choristers of the royal chapel broke forth with the anthem Te Deum Laudamus. Boabdil, king of the Moors, accompanied by about 50 horsemen, here met the Spanish sovereigns, who generously refused to allow him to pay any outward homage to them, and delivered up to him with expressions of kindness his son, who had been for some time in their hands as a hostage. Boabdil handed them the keys of the city, saying, "Thine, O king, are our trophies, our kingdom, and our person. Such is the will of God." After some conversation, the Moorish king passed on in gloomy silence to avoid witnessing the entrance of the Spaniards into the city. Coming at about 2 leagues' distance to an elevated point from which his last view of Granada was to be obtained, he could not restrain himself from turning round to take a parting look at the beautiful city which was lost to him and his forever. "God is great," was all he could say, but a flood of tears burst from his eyes. His mother upbraided him for his softness, but his vizier endeavored to console him by remarking that even great misfortunes served to confer a certain distinction. "Allah Akbar," said he, "when did misfortunes ever equal mine?" From this circumstance, says Mr. Irving in his Chronicle of the Conquest of Granada, the hill, which is not far from Padul, took the name of Fez Allah Akbar, but the point of view commanding the last prospect of Granada is known among Spaniards by the name of El Último Suspiro del Moro, or the last sigh of the Moor. Those are today's excerpts from January 2nd, excerpts from the Book of Days by Chambers. See you tomorrow.